about that briefly. And so please don't go anywhere. You can engage us on our social media platforms. On Facebook, we're at ZFMGH, and on YouTube at Z Multimedia. Please do well to, drop a comment under the live stream. We'll read all of them for you. Also, you can send us a WhatsApp on 0544321019. 0544321019. My name is Nitrebi Hamon. Thank you very much. Let's get into all the things that we have to do this morning. And of course, let's take a quick music break. When we return, I bring you all the conversations that I have for you today. Stay tuned.
I've been through a lot, but grace sustained me. My test is now a testimony. So the essence of my praise is centered on your grace. It was you, my lawyer in that courtroom. It was you, my soldier on that battlefield. So the essence of my praise is centered on your grace. Hey, Nyame, Lord, the essence of my praise is centered on your grace. Hey, Nyame, Lord, the essence of my praise is centered on your grace. Who has changed my story? Who has given me a song? Turned my mourning into dancing. It is you and just your grace. You have changed my story. Protocol breaker, you made a way. You turned my mourning into dancing. It is you and just your grace. Could not have made it without you. Could not have sailed through without you. Your loving kindness, grace and mercy
right, then Hamilton, as she calls this one, at Dawn, bringing us to exactly 27 minutes after 9. And this is the Business Breakfast on Z101.9 FM. All right, so let's get into all the conversations that we have this morning. And today, the major conversation we're having is about Ghana's completion of its 3-year, International Monetary Fund program. And I think that's something that is actually going around or is making waves as of now. Now, the IMF board approved the final review of a $3 billion extended credit facility arrangement, clearing the way for a final disbursement of about $371 million US. Now, depending on who you speak to, this announcement means different things. For some people, this is a sign that Ghana has successfully, navigated one of its most difficult economic periods. For others, it raises deeper questions that what exactly has changed over the years? Have we truly recovered? Are ordinary Ghanaians better off? Are businesses operating in a better environment? And perhaps the biggest question is, have we fixed the problem that took us to the IMF in the first place? Because, completing an IMF program is not the same thing as, becoming an economically successful country. You can complete and still have issues. All right. So it's an important milestone. It's a positive signal, but it is not a final destination. All right. So think about it this way. Now, if someone falls seriously ill and complete a treatment program, completing the treatment is good news. But the bigger question is, has a person changed the habits that caused the illness? Has a person become stronger? Has a person reduced the chances, of falling sick again? And that is a conversation we're having today. Because Ghana went to the IMF. We were sick. Let me put it that way. We were sick. We weren't well. We went to the IMF. Now, the news is that we are done with our treatment program. But the question is that the habits that took us to the IMF, where are we in terms of those habits? Beyond the IMF announcement, beyond the $371 million US, beyond the political celebrations and the criticisms, we want to understand Ghana's economic journey this morning. Where did we come from? Where are we now? And where are we going? And that is what I want to talk to you about this morning. Now, let's begin with the basics. What exactly happened? So, the IMF has completed a final review of Ghana's extended credit facility program. And what this means is that Ghana has completed the conditions attached to the 3-year program and will receive the final disbursement. The total program amount was $3 billion US. But again, let me emphasize something very, very important. The IMF program was never just about receiving $3 billion US. The money was important, very, very important, because, Ghana needed financial support at the time when the economy was under severe pressure. But the IMF program was also about something deeper. It was about restoring confidence. And we all know that confidence matters, among investors. Confidence also matters when it comes to business. It matters when you're engaging with development partners and all of that. And confidence in our economic management is really the focus that we wanted to build, all right, or restore. Now, because economies, like I said, run on confidence. A business owner makes decisions based on confidence. An investor commits capital based on confidence. A foreign company chooses a market based on the confidence that they have in you. And when confidence disappears, even good economies actually struggle. And that was one of the biggest challenges we were facing in 2022. Now, I'm not here to remind us of our pain, but those are some of the issues. I just want us to reflect on where we've come from and where we are today. Now, the country had lost significant confidence. In 2022, we were struggling. The international markets had become difficult to access. The cost of borrowing had increased significantly. The city was under pressure. Inflation was rising. Businesses were struggling. Households were feeling the impact and all of that. So the IMF program was, essentially an attempt to restore stability. But, to understand why Ghana needed our support, I think that we must go back. We must go back to the crisis. We must go to the crisis. Now, every economic crisis has a story. The Ghanaian economy was facing some crisis at the time. And the economic crisis didn't happen in one day. It was not caused by one decision. It was not caused by one government policy. It was a result of several pressures coming together. And to understand where we are today, we need to understand what happened. Now, before the crisis, Ghana had been dealing with growing fiscal challenges. Government expenditure had increased significantly. And let me be very clear on this. This conversation we're having this morning is apolitical. We're just making the point clear so that we can understand exactly where we've come from and where we are today. And this has got nothing to government and all of that, or political parties. Like, we're just focusing on the details and the proper data and all of that we want to focus on this morning. Now, government expenditure had increased significantly. Public debt had risen. In 2022, revenue collection was not growing at the same pace as spending. And we all know that when a country spends more than it earns for a long time, eventually the pressure catches up. Of course, even as individuals, when you are spending more than you have, you get to a time where you continue to experience some pressures. So that's what happened. Now, for years, Ghana financed development partly through borrowing. And borrowing itself, like I always say on this show, is not always bad. And let me repeat that. Borrowing is not automatically bad. Everybody borrows. Businesses borrow. Individuals borrow. Countries borrow. Everybody. Virtually everybody borrows. But the question is, what are you borrowing for? And can you repay? Those are the two questions. What are you borrowing for? And can you repay? Now, if a business borrows money to expand production, to increase revenue, and create value, that borrowing can be productive. But if the borrowing merely supports consumption without increasing the economic capacity, then problems eventually emerge. Now, this was one of the major questions surrounding our debt situation at the time. Were we borrowing enough to create future economic strength? Or were we creating obligations that future generations would struggle to manage? So those are the questions we're grappling with. Then COVID-19 came. That pandemic, we all know, affected economies around the world. Governments had to spend more to protect lives, support businesses, and even manage economic impact. And then came global shocks. Food prices increased, fuel prices increased, interest rates globally increased as well. Countries around the world felt pressure. But countries with stronger economic foundations were better positioned to absorb, the shocks that were coming. Now, Ghana entered this period with existing vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities became more visible. The Ghana cedi depreciated significantly, inflation increased sharply, the cost of living became a major national conversation. And for many Ghanaians, the economic crisis was not something they read about. They experienced it. They felt it. You and I'm sure if you're going to be, if you felt it, you know that you felt it. A trader at Makola felt it. A business owner in Kumasi felt it. A family managing household expenses felt it. A young graduate looking for opportunities felt it. And economic crises are often discussed using technical language. You can talk about GDP, inflation, debt to GDP ratio, fiscal debt, and all of that. But behind every economic number is a human experience. And when inflation rises, it means that people lose purchasing power. And when the currency depreciates, it means that imported goods become more expensive. And when businesses struggle, jobs become harder to create. And that was the environment we found ourselves in at the time. And eventually, we had to turn to IMF. Now, when Ghana entered the IMF program, there were several major objectives. The first objective was to, like I said, restore macroeconomic stability. What does that mean? It means that we're creating an environment where key economic indicators become more predictable, where inflation is controlled, where the exchange rate is stable, where government finances are manageable, and where businesses can plan. Because uncertainty is very, very expensive. A business cannot confidently invest when it does not know what its costs will look like tomorrow. So that was the first objective, macroeconomic stability. We wanted to restore that. Now, the second objective was restoring debt sustainability. Our debt situation had become one of the biggest concerns. And when a country spends too much on its revenue servicing debt, what happens is that fewer resources remain available for development. So you see that things are not happening. All the money we generate, we use that to pay debt. And so money that could go into infrastructure, into healthcare, into education, or even business support gets redirected into debt obligations. So the second thing we wanted to do, the second objective for the IMF program was to restore debt sustainability. And so that was the second one. The third objective was to restore investor confidence. Now, investors want to know, can this country manage its economy? Can it honor its commitments? Can businesses operate in a predictable environment? And all of that. And so that is also the third one, investor confidence. We wanted to restore that. The fourth objective was implementing reforms. Because the IMF's argument has always been that financial support without reforms only delays the problems. A country cannot keep borrowing money to solve problems created by weak systems. So the systems must change, the habits must change, the approach to managing the economy must change. And that is what must happen. And that brings us to the next question. What did Ghana actually achieve under the program? What did we actually achieve under the program? Now, after 3 years, the question is, did the IMF program work? And the answer depends on what exactly we mean by quote and unquote worked. If by success we mean that Ghana has avoided economic collapse and restored some level of stability, then yes, we can say that it has worked. There are clear signs of progress. But if by success we mean that every Ghanaian is now experiencing some economic comfort, then the answer is a bit more complicated. Because economies, don't recover overnight. And economic recovery is not only measured by, what happens in government reports or even international assessments. It is also measured by what happens in people's homes, in businesses, and even workplaces. So that is that. Now let us begin with what has improved. Now, one major area of progress has been inflation. Inflation has become one of the biggest concerns. It became one of the biggest concerns during the crisis. At its peak, we experienced inflation levels that significantly affected households and businesses, very high. And for many people, inflation was not a technical economic term. It was a reality of going to the market and realizing that prices have changed. So you go in the morning, prices are at this particular point. Maybe you go and buy something and you're buying a gallon of oil, of cooking oil, and then you go and then it's maybe around 100 cedis. The next day you go, it's around 120, and then it keeps going up. So inflation was rising on a very fast pace. It was going on a very increasing trajectory. But now we can see that inflation has reduced significantly, and that is very important. But let us explain something that is often misunderstood. When we say inflation has reduced, it does not mean prices have returned to where they were. It simply means that the rate at which prices are increasing has slowed down. So imagine you're driving a car. If the car is moving at 120 kilometers per hour and you reduce the speed to 60 kilometers per hour, the car is still moving. It has simply slowed down. And that is what happens with inflation. Prices may still be rising, but they are rising at a slower pace. And I think we've explained this on this platform a lot. So lower inflation is good news. But the next challenge is ensuring that people actually feel the benefits. Because the question many Ghanaians are asking is that, will my income now go further? Will life become more affordable? Will businesses become easier to operate? Will businesses become easier to operate? And that is where the next phase of economic management becomes important. Now let's talk about one of Ghana's most discussed economic issues, which has got to do with the Ghanaian cedi. Now, for businesses, for investors, and households, the performance of the cedi matters greatly. Why? Why? Because Ghana's economy is still heavily connected to international markets. We import fuel, we import machinery, we import raw materials, we import many goods that businesses depend on. So when the cedi weakens, the impact spreads across the economy. And a business that is importing materials suddenly faces higher costs. A manufacturer that is producing locally pays more. A trader importing goods adjusts prices, and eventually consumers feel the impact. And that is why exchange rate stability really, really matters. Now, Ghana has experienced periods of improved, stability in the foreign exchange market, and that is positive. It helps businesses plan. It improves confidence. It reduces uncertainty and all of that. But the bigger question remains that have we solved the underlying problem? Or have we simply created temporary stability? Because a strong currency is not created by, only by interventions in the foreign market. A strong currency is created by a strong economy. So think about it. Why are some currencies naturally stronger than others? Because those economies are producing more, or they produce more, they export more, they attract investment, and they create a lot of value. So the long-term solution for the cedi is not only, defending the currency. The long-term solution is strengthening our productive capacity. We need to ask, how much are we producing? How much are we exporting? How competitive are our businesses? How much value are we creating locally? Because a country that imports heavily and exports little will always face pressure on its currency. And so the future of the cedi depends on the future of our economy. If the economy becomes strong, then our currency will be stronger. But if not, they will continue to do the cosmetic approach, trying to solve it with injecting some money into the forex market and all of that. So that is that. Now, one of the biggest issues connected to our IMF program was debt. Before we discuss where we're going, we must understand where we were. And debt itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Like I've said, every modern economy has or uses debt. Governments borrow to build roads. The businesses borrow to expand. Individuals even borrow. Countries borrow to invest in development and all of that. The problem is when the debt becomes too expensive to manage. When too much of government revenue goes into paying debt, it limits the ability to invest in other areas. So instead of focusing on resources on development, a significant portion goes into servicing obligations. And this is what Ghana had to confront. And one of the difficult steps that was taken was a debt restructuring. We had to restructure our debt. And that is what we call the DDEP. It became one of the most significant and controversial economic decisions in recent years. Now, for government, it was necessary to restore the debt sustainability. But for many citizens and institutions, it came with real consequences. Investors were affected. Pension funds were affected. Financial institutions were affected. Individuals who had invested in government securities were affected. And this is where economic policy becomes complicated. A decision can be necessary from a national, economic perspective and still create hardship for individuals. And that is why economic management requires a lot of balance. Governments must not only think about numbers, they must think about the people. Because behind every economic decisions are real lives. All right. And so that's exactly what happened at the time. Very bad situation, but we had to go through it. Now, as we discuss the IMF program, we must have a very honest conversation. Who carried the burden? Because every economic adjustment has consequences. Some of the hardest questions are not about, economics. They're about the people. What happened to households? What happened to businesses? What happened to young people looking for opportunities? Many Ghanaians experienced a lot of difficult times. And the cost of living increased. Businesses faced higher operating expenses. Companies expanded. They delayed their expansion. Some entrepreneurs struggled to survive. Some families had to quit their lifestyle because, their incomes could no longer cover the same expenses. And this brings us to a very important question. Was the hardship necessary? Well, I think that's a very difficult question. But was it necessary? Because you see, when an economy reaches a crisis point, correction becomes unavoidable. You have no option. The challenge is not whether difficult decisions should be made. The challenge is whether those decisions lead to lasting transformation. Because citizens can accept sacrifice when they see progress. They can endure difficult periods when they believe the future will be better. But when hardship becomes a repeated experience without improvement, then frustration will grow. And the responsibility after the IMF program is therefore very clear, that the benefits of economic stability must reach ordinary people. People must feel it. The recovery must be visible. It must become felt. So that is that. Now, let's look at the business community. Because at the heart of every economy are businesses. Businesses create jobs, they invest, they produce goods and services, they generate revenue and all of that. So how has the IMF program affected businesses? The answer is mixed. is mixed, you know. Now, on one hand, economic stabilization creates a lot of confidence. Businesses prefer predictable environments and all of that. They want to know what inflation will look like. They want to know what the exchange rate will look like. They want to know what government policy will look like, and all of that. A stable economy actually allows businesses to plan, but the challenges remain. Many businesses continue to face high borrowing costs, energy challenges, tax pressures, limited access to finance, operational difficulties. All of these things are things that businesses go through. Now, for small business especially, the question is not only whether the economy is stable, the question is whether they can survive and grow. Because economic recovery must include SMEs. Small businesses are not, they are not small in importance. They employ people, they support families, they drive communities. And if we want to sustain growth in this kind, or if we want sustainable growth, the private sector must become stronger. All right. So the next phase cannot simply be about government managing the economy. It must be about government creating an environment where businesses can thrive. All right. So that is very, very important. So the question that we have to confront is, have we really changed? With going to IMF, have we really changed? Because Ghana's economic history teaches us something very important. That the problem has never only been entering an IMF program. The problem has been what happens after. And over the years, we've experienced a lot of cycles. Economic pressure, we go to IMF, get a support, recovery, confidence, and then another crisis, and then a circle. We continue to go back in circles. So the real measure of the success is not completing this program. The real measure is whether Ghana has changed the habits that brought us here. Have we changed how we spend? Have we changed how we borrow? Have we changed how we invest? Have we changed how we produce? Have we changed how we manage public resources? If these things have not been done, then there's a problem. And if they have been done, then we are on the right path. Now, because if we do not address those questions, history can repeat itself. The IMF program was a response to a crisis, but the next chapter must be about building an economy that does not need emergency intervention. And I've heard the finance minister says that Ghana must not go back to the IMF anytime soon. We hope so. And that is a very, very important thing. Now, we're going to get into a final part where I get to share with you what happens after the IMF. What does the new policy coordination instrument mean? Whether we can sustain the discipline without IMF financing and all of that. We'll talk about that very, very soon. But let's take a quick breather, and then when we come back, we have that final conversation, and then we can wrap up for today. Please stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the Business Breakfast on Z101.9 FM, Mili by Luigi McLean. All right, so let's try and wrap up now. But we've been having a very important conversation this morning about Ghana's completion of the IMF Extended Credit Facility Program. And so far, we have looked at where Ghana came from. We have looked at the economic crisis that pushed the country towards the IMF. And we have also examined what the program was designed to achieve. We have looked at the gains. We have also discussed the difficult questions, the hardships, the sacrifices, the impact on households and businesses. But now we come to perhaps the most important part of the conversation. What happens next? What happens next? Because completing the IMF program is not the end of our economic journey. In many ways, it is the beginning of the real test. Why? Because during the program, Ghana had a framework. There were targets, there was monitoring, there was external oversight, and there was an international institution working alongside government to, ensure that certain commitments were met. And now Ghana enters a different phase, a phase where the responsibility becomes even greater. The IMF will still be involved through the policy coordination instrument, but this is a bit different. There will no longer be, billions of dollars coming in as financial support. There will no longer be an emergency program designed to rescue the economy. Ghana must now demonstrate that it can maintain stability on its own. And that raises a very important question. Can Ghana maintain economic discipline without pressure of an IMF program? That's a very important question, because history tells us something. Like I was telling you a while ago, the difficult part is not always fixing the crisis. The difficult part is preventing another one. How can you sustain that, whatever you've recorded? So let us spend some time explaining this new arrangement. Now, many Ghanaians hear policy coordination instruments and wonder, what exactly does this mean? How is it different from the IMF bailout? The extended credit facility that we all know was a financing program. Ghana received financial support, and that support helped the country manage economic pressures while implementing reforms. Now, the policy coordination instrument is different. It does not provide money. Instead, it provides policy guidance, monitoring, and credibility. So think of it like this. So during the IMF program, Ghana was like a patient, receiving treatment and medicine and all of that. The policy coordination instrument is more like regular medical checkups after recovery. So we have to consistently be checking you and know that, oh, you're fine. This is better. Okay, improve this, do that. And then you continue to go. So the doctor is no longer providing emergency treatment, but the doctor is checking whether you are maintaining healthy eating habits. Not eating necessarily, but healthy habits. Are you following the right practices? Are you avoiding a return to the same problem? And all of that. And that is a very essential one. I think that it's good that government has actually committed to that, because, what we've seen in the past is that we just come out of IMF and we're excited. In fact, in this country, we play politics with the IMF issues. You went to IMF. We didn't go to IMF. You did this. You did that. Yeah, but it's not about who went to IMF and who didn't. The conversation now is, how do we sustain it? How do we move from here to there? How do we make sure that whatever we are seeing now, the economic gains we recorded, we don't go back to the 2022 days? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. All right. And clearly, from choosing this particular policy coordination instrument, it tells us that Ghana remains committed to, sound economic management, really. But the responsibility is now greater, because there's no longer financial safety net. The decision we make now from this point will determine whether the progress continues or whether some old problems return. Now, if there's one lesson Ghana's economic history has taught us, it is this: that recovery is not permanent unless behavior changes. A country can stabilize its economy, it can reduce inflation, it can restructure debt, it can regain confidence. But if the same habits return, the same problems can return. So what are the risks? Now, the first risk is excessive government spending. Governments naturally face pressure to deliver projects, especially when you're coming to power. You make all the promises, and so when you come, people expect you to, deliver. And like you've seen already happening, people are asking, where is the 24-hour economy? Where is this? Where is that? Where is that? So those are the questions, and there's pressure on you as a government to be able to, fund those projects and make things happen. All right. And they face pressure from citizens. They face pressure from even political expectations and all of that. They face demands from different sectors. But economic reality remains the same. A government cannot spend money it does not have. A government cannot spend money it does not have. At some point, the bill arrives. So we have to be very careful. So the first risk is excessive government spending. The second one is excessive borrowing. Now, borrowing can support development, but borrowing must be strategic. The question must always be, what are we borrowing for? Are we borrowing to expand economic capacity? Are we borrowing to create future revenue? Or whatever? What are we borrowing for? Are we borrowing to, simply finance immediate needs? Those are the questions. So the second risk is excessive borrowing. The third risk, which will be my last one for that, is that there is election cycle economics. This is a difficult conversation, but a very important one. Now, many developing countries like Ghana struggle with maintaining fiscal discipline during election periods. So you see that when elections are coming, we spend so much. The temptation is always there to, increase spending, try to, provide the solutions that you said you were going to provide, the programs you said you were going to implement, the things you said you were going to do. There's this tendency for you to try to impress. So towards the end of an election cycle, towards the end of a tenure where there's election coming, a lot of expenses actually come in. But economic decisions made for short-term political benefits can create long-term economic costs. And a country's economy must be bigger than than any election cycle. And so that is very, very important. Now, there's an issue about revenue. Now, one of our economic challenges has always been revenue. A government can only sustainably spend what it can generate. And this is where we must have a very serious conversation, because how does Ghana raise enough money to fund development? Because every country needs resources. We need roads, we need schools, we need hospitals, we need infrastructure, we need investment in technology and all of that. But development requires financing. The challenge is finding the right balance. A country cannot overburden businesses and citizens with taxes, because that can slow economic activity. And at the same time, a country cannot avoid raising revenue, because that creates dependence on borrowing. So the solution is not simply introducing more taxes. The bigger question is, how do we grow the economy so that more people and businesses can contribute? And that's exactly the focus that government has decided to, pay attention to. Cut taxes, put money in the pockets of people, and find a way to bring a lot more people into the tax net. That is the simple strategy the finance minister said they were going to focus on. And so that is that. Now, one thing too is that if we truly want sustainable economic growth, then the private sector must become the engine. Government has an important role. Government creates policies. Government builds infrastructure. Government provides, the environment. But governments do not create enough jobs alone. It's the businesses that do, the entrepreneurs, the investors, and the innovators. So we need to, focus heavily on making businesses stronger. Once we are able to do that, then we can be able to see some changes also happen. Now, let's talk about the people who represent Ghana's future, young people. Because at the end of every economic discussion, we must come back to the question, what does this mean for jobs? Economic stability is very, very important. But stability must create opportunity. A young graduate does not wake up asking, what is Ghana's debt to GDP ratio? They don't. We don't ask that. They ask, can I find work? Can I build a business? Can I create a future for myself? And that is a human side of economics. And we have a very youthful population. And this can either become our greatest advantage or our greatest challenge. If we create opportunities, our young population becomes a powerful economic force. If we fail to create opportunities, unemployment and frustration can increase. So the next phase must focus on a lot of things like skills, digital skills, entrepreneurial skills, technical, creative skills, and all of those things. Because the jobs of tomorrow may not look like the jobs of today or the jobs of yesterday. The economy is changing, technology is changing, and industries are changing. And Ghana must prepare young people not only to look for jobs, but also to create a lot of value. And so that must also be done. Now, after everything we have discussed this morning, let us return to our original question. Has Ghana really turned the corner? The honest answer is that Ghana has turned the corner. Yes, from what we are seeing now, Ghana has turned the corner, but we have not reached a destination. The country has moved from crisis management into recovery, but recovery is not the same as transformation. The IMF program helped us stabilize, but stabilization must now become growth, and growth must become jobs. Jobs must become improved livelihoods, and that is a journey ahead. The biggest mistake Ghana can make now is believing that the hard work is finished. The hard work has changed. Before the focus was survival. Now the focus must be building industries, building businesses, building institutions, building confidence, and building a future. And so that's very important. Now, as we close today's conversation, or business, as we end today's conversation, let me leave you with this thought. Now, the IMF program was a response to a difficult chapter in our economic story. It was necessary because the country, reached a point where difficult decisions had to be made. But the IMF cannot build Ghana's economy. We must do it ourselves. Ghanaians must. Government must make responsible policies. Businesses must innovate and grow. Citizens must demand accountability. Young people must prepare themselves for the opportunities of the future. And the end of the IMF program is not the end of the economic conversation. It is the beginning of a new responsibility. And the question is no longer, can we survive the crisis? The question is, can Ghana build an economy that is strong enough to avoid another crisis? And that is a challenge we have to face. That is the opportunity. And that is the work that lies ahead. All right. So that will be all for this morning on Business Breakfast on Z with me, Nietzsche Bihamon. We're back again tomorrow for some more interesting conversations. So until then, please keep listening to Z 101.9 FM. I'll see you tomorrow. My name is Nietzsche Bihamon. Up next is The Brighter Side with Jeremy Okorie Amwako. This morning, she has a lot of things to serve you. And so make sure that you stay tuned. And of course, when you think Ghana, think Z. I'll see